Hey everyone, my name is Scott and welcome to the channel and welcome to the first episode of What I've Been Watching, the replacement for 366 2020, where we talk about what I've been watching. Each week I will give you the rundown as far as what kind of movies I've been checking out throughout the week, and we'll take some time at the end of the episode to respond to some comments, something I haven't done on the channel before. Only watched 4 movies this week. It's been a busy, kind of chaotic week if you haven't noticed. Let's get started. Axel is a 2018 family film. Our hero is a down-on-his-luck dirt bike racer who's struggling to make ends meet. He is befriended by some richer racers who turn on him, beat him, and leave him for dead in the middle of the desert, where he finds a robotic dog which escaped from a military contractor's compound. And it's there where they become fast friends after he wins the robotic dog's affection. It's a lot of Short Circuit and a lot of E.T. mixed into one. A lot of Short Circuit. I didn't mind the film overall, mostly because I like both of those properties. So I gave it a little leeway because it came from a place I admire, even though at times the acting is a bit Nickelodeon in nature. The dog looks weird sometimes. When it's a practical effect, it looks good at times, and then sometimes its eyes are a little strange. It fares better when it's a computer effect. Sometimes. It's hit and miss depending on the shot on what the dog is going to look like, and that takes you out of the movie at some points. You can tell at some point in time this movie was going to be rated PG-13 just based on some of the language that is obviously still in the film but has been ADR'd over. It probably fares better as a PG movie, get you a wider audience, but this movie does not add to the genre it's in. It isn't better than the sum of its parts from other movies. I didn't hate the experience, but it's not an experience I would go back to. Tomb Raider is a 2018 action-adventure movie which stars Alicia Vikander as Lara Croft, a character we've seen in a couple movies and a whole load of video games before. This is an origin story, and I liked how the film started. Lara Croft is a down-on-her-luck bike messenger. You can see the ingenuity there. You can see the street smarts there that would serve her well once she decides to take up the family business. And it's a fun adventure film in its first act. It hits a wall in its second act. Once it gets out of New York, it becomes standard action-adventure fare, and Lara Croft doesn't have that same sense of ingenuity and street smarts that she had in the first act. She's kind of left to just flounder from scene to scene. And the movie gets very paint by the numbers in its third act, and the tomb that she is raiding, the puzzles she has to solve are pretty paint by numbers and or incredibly confusing, where I didn't know how she came up with the answer to them. Walton Goggins shows up in the second act of this thing as our main antagonist. I think he's one of the best character actors working today, but he's also very good at playing off another character. In this movie, he's left to just monologue, and he does his best with the material, but I don't feel like he's as strong as he has been in other movies where he's given someone to play against. Laura just ends up sitting there most of the time, and there's no banter, so Walton does his best with the material, just he can't lift it out of its paint-by-numbers nature. And the action scenes go back and forth between looking very good and looking very bad. A lot of the larger set pieces are edited relatively well, but when the film gets into hand-to-hand combat, that's when the editing starts to struggle and the cuts don't make a lot of sense. And since this becomes your standard action movie in its second act, and it doesn't do anything remarkable with the material, it seems to be a little forgettable. And it sets itself up for a sequel that might not even come. So it's a mixed bag of a movie. Soul is a 2020 Disney Pixar animated family film directed by Pete Docter and Kemp Powers. Pete Docter, of course, is the man behind some of Disney Pixar's biggest properties. And the one I'll mention is Inside Out. And I mention Inside Out because it is the biggest comparison to Soul. They cover not identical territory, but similar territory in a way. Soul is the story of Joe. He's voiced by Jamie Foxx. He's a down-on-his-luck musician who spends his days teaching children and spends his nights trying to get gigs to become a professional jazz pianist. Joe lands the biggest gig of his career when something tragic happens that keeps him from playing it, and I'll leave it at that. If you've seen Inside Out, the comparisons will come to mind almost instantly once this movie shows you its hand. I feel like Soul has to do a lot of heavy lifting that Inside Out didn't to get the audience into the concept. While Inside Out's concept was laid out visually and through dialogue, and it all came naturally to the film, Soul is very exposition heavy in its first act. This movie does a lot of explaining, and it tends to drag the film down. What makes it feel like it's not completely being dragged down is the film's visual style. Much like Toy Story 4 before it, it has a photorealism, but has those Pixar-like human characters. It seems like in this film it's not as jarring as it was in Toy Story 4. Maybe I'm getting used to it, I don't know. But once the film shows its hand, the visual style is astounding. It looks great. It's a feast for the eyes. My problem with Soul is mostly the clunkiness of its first act and trying to get the audience into its concept. Once you're there, the film works relatively well from there on out. But I think Soul has a harder time getting the audience to that point. As with Pete Docter's other Pixar movies, this is upper echelon Pixar stuff. It gets to that point of transcendence which I talk about when it comes to Pixar movies. My favorite Pixar movies are the ones that, when you're watching them, get to a point where you can say to yourself, okay, now I'm watching something special. And Soul gets there, but man, does it have to do a lot of heavy lifting to get there. Not to say I didn't like the film, I did like the film. Pete Docter always does the best work for Pixar, but having said that, it's not as natural as some of his other work. And speaking of Inside Out, I checked out Pixar's other film from 2015, The Good Dinosaur, which is a great tech demo for Pixar. Our hero is Arlo. He is an undersized and timid dinosaur who, in trying to keep his family's food from being stolen, gets lost from his family and has to make his way back. Again, I'll leave it at that. This movie cribs a lot from The Lion King. I mean, there are moments from this movie that are shot for shot The Lion King. Without The Lion King's antagonist, the antagonist for the majority of this picture is Arlo's own scared nature. And because there is no antagonist for the most part in this movie, it becomes rather side quest heavy. I mean, the side quests in the film do not connect to the rest of the film. They're just things he goes off to do, and then it's over. And because of this, it leaves the film to be pretty stagnant narratively. And that makes an hour and 30-minute film feel like 3 hours. The second act of this thing drags. We talk about transcendence. This movie it doesn't really get there. It almost gets there, but it rings hollow because the narrative is so empty. The film feels like a series of short films, and in that way, it does feel like a tech demo for what Pixar would do in the next 5 years. It looks great. They nailed water way before Toy Story 4. I just never saw this film. It looks amazing. It looks like a nature documentary at times, but also it's not in support of anything. And while the voice acting is relatively good throughout and Sam Elliott shows up as an elder statesman T-Rex, it's a lesser Pixar film. And those are the 4 movies I saw this week. Now on to comments. If you watch the final wrap-up for 366 2020, I revealed to you guys that I am a professional editor and director, and this led Anthony to ask what TV shows I've edited. Well, Anthony, first I'll answer your question in a very short way, and then in a very long-winded way. It's kind of my way around here. The short answer is probably nothing you've ever seen unless you live in Indiana. The long answer is to talk about the landscape of professional editing. We're a lot like icebergs in that a majority of us do stuff that you'll never see. In that, I'd say an estimate of 80% of people that do professional editing work do corporate video, and that is instructional video for corporations, things you would never see on television that are just made to be shown inside companies. For example, whenever Taco Bell makes a new product, they probably send out a video to their franchisees that explain how to make and how to present the new product. Someone has to shoot, edit, voiceover, and put out that video. That's corporate video. It is not the most exciting or glamorous work, but it has to be done. And learning that lesson, that a majority of the work that's done is not on TV, was something I learned pretty quickly out of college. I am on the credit sequence of an industrial video about how to settle HR disputes. It's something I did in my internship and helped edited. It's not something you'd ever see. I couldn't even tell you the company that we made it for, but that's the kind of stuff that most people do. I can name 10 people off the top of my head that I've worked with throughout the years that's all they do, is stuff that you'd never see. If that's the 80%, there's probably another 10% of people on top of that that do local media work. We're talking about local commercials and television news. Those local commercials are going by the wayside as companies start to realize that the gear's getting cheaper and they can just hire a person to have on staff to do both their corporate videos and their commercials. But that 80% and that 10% are the 2 wells that I have my hands in. Most of my stuff is local media based. I do some corporate video stuff on the side as a freelancer, but most of my stuff is television news based or television promotions based. Also where I direct. And then it's the 10% above that that are the people who do your movies, your TV shows, your big cable shows. That's a very small percentage of overall editing work, and it's the upper echelon of people that do that. And I'm just not there yet. Maybe I'll never be there, I don't know. But that's the long answer, is that editing work is not very glamorous sometimes, and I'm very much in the not very glamorous part of it. That is it for this episode. I will see you guys in 1 week when we talk about what I've been watching. Thanks for tuning in. I can't say thanks for watching anymore. It's like double watching. It's real awkward.